offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. It shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
Castro thought the Americans were about to attack, and he wanted Khrushchev to order those missiles fired and eliminate this scourge from the face of the earth. We'd all been lied to about it. Khrushchev had a back-channel means of corresponding with Kennedy. He lied about what he was doing in Cuba. War was likely to come, and some of those hawks were saying, "I told you so." That all of us sitting around that table could be sitting there in our last day on Earth.
The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war.
Showtime. Welcome to the show, folks. I'm Brent Holland, and welcome to the show. Tonight, we're going to be looking at a new documentary called Atomic Reaction, and essentially what that is Canada's essential role in the Manhattan Project. Now, for those of you too young to know, the Manhattan Project, no, it's not a drink, nor is it Manhattan in New York. The Manhattan Project was the code name that was given to the building of the atomic bomb during World War II. Now, with the enormous success of Christopher Nolan's feature film Oppenheimer, it told the story of how society changed before the atomic bomb and its consequences since, and those are profound. Tonight, of course, we're going to discuss Canada's role in the making of the atomic bomb. In a new feature-length documentary titled Atomic Reaction, the documentary reveals the pivotal role Canada played in making nuclear warfare a reality. But there were severe consequences to that effort. Our guest tonight is a legend in the Canadian music industry, Bernie Finkelstein. Bernie founded True North Records and has won, are you ready for this, folks? 40 Juno Awards. Now, again, folks, for those of you in other lands, that's Canada's Grammys. He has managed Gordon Lightfoot, Randy Bachman, and Lighthouse. It's my great pleasure to welcome executive producer of Atomic Reaction, Bernie Finkelstein, to the show. Now, Bernie, let me start out by saying we both grew up in the Cold War era. Those memories are fresh in my mind, and I don't think they've ever gone away. Would you remember the Cuban Missile Crisis and how you felt? What was the biggest worry for you during that period? For me, it was always the fallout, the threat of the radiation and what would come from a nuclear holocaust. Was it indeed the same for you?
Yes. No, I'd say exactly that. I mean, I remember we used to have drills at school. I was still going to school, high school, during that period. And it was a very scary time, actually. And it's still a scary time. Those nuclear weapons haunt us to some degree.
They're ever present everywhere. And every time Mr. Putin opens his mouth, he always threatens the use of them.
Yes.
And that's where I want to go tonight, is the radiation, the leftovers from the Manhattan Project, if you will. And I feel the documentary Atomic Reaction that you're executive producer of covers that exceptionally well, especially the Canadian contributions to it. And of course, we're going to get into the consequences of those contributions. Okay, radium was first discovered in 1898 by Marie Curie. Radium has a unique property, folks. It glows in the dark. Bernie, the documentary points out that there was a significant market for radium. It was used in a wide range of products, from cosmetics to outrageous claims of health cures, a cure-all, if you will. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes. Well, when we were doing the research, I mean, what we should tell people, I think, at this point is that the uranium used in the atomic bombs dropped on Japan, and the test bomb Trinity a week prior to that. All of that uranium was 100% processed in Port Hope, Ontario. It also is commonly thought that that very same uranium that was processed in Port Hope was used in those bombs as well. Now, we're not 100% sure of that, no matter how deep we did the research, because there was one other source of uranium. And although we're 100% sure that that other source was processed in Port Hope, because it was the only place where there was a processing plant. But there was a second source that came from the Belgium Congo via Staten Island. And the uranium may have been mixed up when it was in Port Hope. But nonetheless, it's 100% certain it was all processed in Port Hope. Now, the uranium was discovered in 1930 on Great Bear Lake. For those that don't know Great Bear Lake, it's in the Northwest Territories. It's actually the world's 8th largest lake. I believe it's larger than all of the Great Lakes except Superior. And it's a beautiful lake. And it was discovered on the east shore in 1930 by a Canadian prospector named Gilbert Labine. And Gilbert started a company called Eldorado, which is quite famous if you are into that sort of stuff. The company now has changed its name to Cameco. But nonetheless, by 32, they had built a mine, and that mine was known, a little town grew up around it on Great Bear Lake called Port Radium, which I love. I love that name, Port Radium. I don't know if we would name something that today. And as you said earlier, radium was extremely sought after, as was uranium, and it was worth around $75,000 an ounce in 1932. So it and there was all kinds of our film shows all kinds of advertisements for things like butter, where the uranium is being used. Everything. It was used in everything, and people actually thought it was healthy for them to some degree. But nonetheless, over the years, scientists started thinking about what else you could do with uranium, and mostly splitting the atom. And by splitting the atom, you could make a tremendous bomb. And just to sort of cap that off a bit, in the 30s, a group of scientists were very, very concerned that Hitler, this would be in the middle 30s, maybe
1938, actually. Yeah.
Well, Berlin. 38 when
Nazi Berlin. Yeah.
Yeah. But it started more in the middle 30s.
Right.
But yeah, 38. Well, what happened in 38 was 16 scientists wrote a letter to FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, then the American president. And but they realized that their letter may not get read. So they went to see Albert Einstein, who was then living in Princeton. And Einstein was a pacifist, and he had to think about it, actually, as to whether he would sign the letter. But he did finally sign the letter 24 hours later after giving it thought, because the idea of Hitler getting a bomb terrified Einstein. So they sent the letter to FDR, and FDR called in his inner cabinet and in 38, and they looked at the letter. The U.S. was a very neutral country in 38, and the World War had not started.
That's right.
But Hitler's aggression had started. It was quite, he already did things with Austria and Czechoslovakia. whatever. But anyway, so FDR put the letter away in his drawer, so the legend has it. And then when Pearl Harbor happened in 41, the first thing he did was pull out that letter. And then he called in General Grove, and they started the Manhattan Project. And just the name actually did come from Manhattan because they started the project in Manhattan, but it soon spread to almost every university where there was a great physicist. And of course, they ended up centralizing everything in Los Alamos in New Mexico, and that's where they invented the bomb.
Exactly, folks. And just to let you know, in Nazi Berlin in 1938, that's where they discovered fission. And of course, as Bernie just said, that just sent off electricity around the world, especially amongst the Jewish community, because it had just happened a month after Kristallnacht, which happened November 10th and 11th, 1938. And this happened in December 1938. So, of course, Einstein being Jewish, and let's face it, Hitler wanted to wipe out the Jewish race, as we all know about the Holocaust. Now, you had also mentioned that every university around the country, and that included McGill. McGill was a part of that as well.
Yes, McGill, as a matter of fact, McGill, at the turn of the century, around 1900, actually was home to Ernest Rutherford.
That's right.
The man that actually discovered the atom in around 1900. And you can go to McGill, and they actually have a Rutherford physics building, and they have a little museum there. Yeah. And Rutherford won a Nobel Prize essentially for the work that he did in Canada. That's during the 8 years that he was a professor at McGill University. So there's a lot of Canadian connections. But what happened is Labine needed a place, so he discovers the ore, and they're mining the ore. Now he needed a place to process it, because it's actually called pitch blende when you take it out of the ground. And you need tons of pitch blende to get a few ounces of pure uranium, is the way it works. So our film tells a very interesting story. I won't get into all the detail, or we'll be here for 10 hours. But if you watch the film, those viewers of yours, they will see that he built a plant on the port in Port Hope. He actually didn't build it. He bought an old abandoned tea factory and turned it into a uranium processing plant. And it was the remnants of the uranium processing that was spread around very casually. Not to necessarily blame those people that did it. They may not have understood, although they may well have. And our film sort of deals with that, and people can come to their own conclusions, I think. And they spread it around Port Hope, and now in the year 2024, they're in the middle of a cleanup in Port Hope that has now been going on for 10 years. It was supposed to go on for 2 or 3 years. It was supposed to cost $1.2 billion, which is a lot of money already, but now nobody knows for sure. I think we feel that they probably are getting closer to $4 billion by now. Yeah. And they still haven't finished the cleanup. And they've had to tear down some houses. But we let the people of Port Hope talk about that in our film. So to some degree, our film is about the discovery of the uranium, its role in the Manhattan Project. And of course, the American films, whether it's Oppenheimer or any of the other, they never mention where that uranium comes from, because I guess they would rather not. I don't think it's because they got anything against Canada. They just don't like to give credit to anybody, I think.
I think we're in World War II films of that nature and documentaries. Canada's always a second thought. I've seen so many
And
documentaries on D-Day, and sometimes Canada doesn't even get mentioned for our role during
yeah,
D-Day. Now, I want to go back to Great Bear Lake because, folks, Great Bear Lake, I'm showing you a map of it right now, and where Port Hope is, 6,000 kilometers. So the
amazing.
logistics of getting that down to Port Hope, which sits right between Kingston and Toronto, so you'll be able to see the map again. I'll be showing a map, Bernie, just to let you know.
Good, great, good.
And the logistics of getting it there. Now, the poor folks, the poor fellas up in Great Bear Lake would throw these sacks of radium over their shoulders. And of course, there was no protection whatsoever. Could we talk a little bit about the health consequences just in Great Bear Lake for now?
Yeah, well, first off, Great Bear Lake is on Dene, and the mine is on Dene territory. Dene are an indigenous tribe, and they are largely in the Northwest Territories, Yellowknife further north. And by the way, the mine is, I think, only a few kilometers from the Arctic Circle. And yes, they built this town, and we've got great pictures of the town and about the brothel that was built, etc. Anyway, they brought in miners. They did not use the Dene to do the actual mining because they wanted to bring in people that had experience, and but they used the Dene to carry the ore in gunny sacks down from the mine. The mine was on a hill, and they would carry it, and they would carry it down to the barge, which was on the lake, and the barge would go across the lake to the mouth of the Mackenzie River, the mighty Mackenzie River. And of course, over the years, many of those people sadly died of cancer. And there's a little village that many of them came from called Delaney.
Mhm.
And the village of Delaney became known as the Village of Widows because so many of the people died. Uh, I think it wasn't necessarily purposeful that this happened. I don't think people understood what they were doing exactly. But again, our film shows you the facts, and you can come to your own
On
conclusions.
conclusions, exactly right.
But yes, there was some tragic fallout, no pun intended,
Mm.
from that mine.
And this is,
It's
folks, the film we're talking about, which Bernie Finkelstein, our guest tonight, is executive producer of, is called Atomic Reaction. And it's Canada's role in the Manhattan Project, but also the consequences thereof. And we're in 2024 right now, and we're still dealing with those consequences in a small city called Port Hope, where the refinery still remains, although it's transferred ownership. But all that waste, because as Bernie said before, you take this solid rock and you extract a little bit of radium, a little bit of uranium. And what do you do with the waste? Now that's all radioactive. So you find dump sites to dump it. And that's what happened in Port Hope. It was spread out all over. And
yes,
there are reports, folks, where each house on every street, they would go into the basement and the Geiger counter would go through the ceiling. And they're trying to raise families there. So there is a cleanup going on. The government is behind it. I also wanted to mention that Canada has the second largest amount of uranium. It accounts for 13% of total global output. Now, I just want to scroll down to this. In the documentary, a fellow by the name of Robert Del Tredici, hope I have got
great.
his name right, is interviewed. And what was stunning to me, I learned so much from this documentary, Bernie. Thank you
Okay,
for producing it.
thank you.
Um, it's an interesting quote. This fellow is co-founder of Atomic Photographers Guild. He covered Three Mile Island, but he describes life in Port Hope, and this is chilling. Hope, as if you're living in Port Hope, you're living as if in a knot. Could you imagine that day out, wondering if your kids are safe, if they're not safe? Is it in the water supply? Is it not in the water supply? It's in the ground. We know that. They're trying to excavate and get rid of the ground. But where do you put that waste? We've already made that mistake once. So where does that waste go? Bernie, could you continue with that
Well,
line of thought?
yeah, well, it's a good question as to exactly where they are putting the waste. Because to some degree, as Robert says, the true half-life of uranium is almost infinity. So you never really get rid of it. All you can do is move it. So they have all kinds of plans. I mean, I think, I don't want to be too unfair to Port Hope. I mean, it it seems like Port Hope it's a beautiful town, and people live there and they're happy there, but there is a lot of worry. Um, Now, the chemical plant, which is the old El Dorado plant,
Mhm.
is apparently very safe. But exactly what they're doing, you know, this. If I can just go back a little
Sure,
bit
please do.
about one point that I didn't make, is that when the Americans started needing more and more uranium because just they were just eating it up, so to speak, working on trying to make these bombs, experimenting with it. Um, the Canadian government actually quite silently nationalized the mine. So the Canadian government ended up owning that mine during that period during the war.
During the war.
And
Yeah, the mine had closed down. Mackenzie
after
King came along after the
sorry,
Quebec
the Quebec
gathering.
Accord,
They
yeah,
opened it up
yeah,
secretly. Shh.
yeah, yeah, that's right. And it was, Canadians are good at keeping secrets.
Yeah, we sure
Unfortunately, they're very
are.
good.
Now,
Uh,
please.
no, go ahead.
I was going to say one of the concerns I have living in Kingston today is that a lot of this got dumped into the Port Hope um, Bay. And of
Uh,
course, that's Lake Ontario, folks. Now that travels downstream uh, past Kingston and all the way, if you will, to Montreal, Quebec City, because it turns into the St. Lawrence River. So this is a concern, an ongoing concern. Now, Bernie, I'm going to ask you, do you feel the necessity to mine radium was worth the consequences of today? Do you think the rush to make the bomb to finish
well, that's a very tough.
the Second World War? Tough question, I know.
I mean, I think that uh, I will. You'd have to go back to that time, and yes, I mean, I think in the end, I probably feel that. Let's put it this way: I'm glad that the Americans ended up with the bomb, not the Germans
Me
at that
too.
time.
Yeah.
So that's the best way I can put it. As to and I think dropping the first bomb might have been a necessity. I mean, I think you can argue both sides of that coin. I think dropping the second one was actually probably pretty unnecessary. That's
Okay.
my opinion.
Fair enough. Fair
Um,
enough.
you
That's what I
know,
wanted.
is it worth having ever discovered the bomb? Well, I don't know. I mean, I guess in a way, it's like perhaps was it worth discovering a motor engine, given the pollution that we live with and the possibility that it's helping to cause these horrible hurricanes that we're hearing about all the time
Yeah.
now? These are hard questions to answer. We, as filmmakers, we let people talk for themselves. As a person who made the film, um, I understand why Gilbert Levine discovered that. I mean, he's an amazing character, and I almost would love to do a documentary on him. He's
Hmm.
so interesting, and he invited Newport Radium to paint at A.Y. Jackson has many paintings. We show some of them in our film. A.Y.
Beautiful.
Jackson from the Group of Seven,
Yeah.
the paintings of the mine. So, do I wish? I mean, I wish there was no nuclear power in a way. I mean, I wish, but I don't have an opinion of whether or not it should have happened or shouldn't have happened. All I know is that it was a horrible war. It was a war that the side we were on, Canadians, needed to win. And this was the American scientists' solution. They were fearful that the Germans, who had really invented fission themselves, were making a bomb. Uh, what they knew for sure and what they didn't know for sure, these are very difficult subjects to unwind. A lot of it is still secret. Um, but it's a very, you asked a very good question. And I
Thank you.
think my answer is simply if somebody had to make a bomb, I'm glad it was our side that did it.
Me too. I'm in complete agreement with you 110%. As Churchill said, we had to do what we had to do to win the war. The idea was to win the war. There was no way Nazi Germany could run the world. And we were that close, folks. We truly were. Now, we're running out of time, but I just want to mention this because I think it's important. The film will be shown at the Durham Regional International Film Festival, October 24th to
Yes.
27th. And it starts airing on CBC Documentary Channel, Muzzle Tough, on October 27th and CBC Gem, January 10th, 2025. And the Regent Theater in Picton, which is a beautiful spot, folks. And you can Google all these things and find out where they are in Ontario, and that's November 24th, 2024, which I hope to attend live in person. I'd be love to shake your hands, folks, if you're there. Just look for the guy that looks like Brad Pitt and then look beside him. That'll be me. Bernie, I have to ask you this. What is a music legend like yourself? What drew you into the depths of this story?
Well, I got approached by a filmmaker here in Prince Edward County to do another music documentary. I had done two, both of them on Bruce Cockburn. And he took me out for lunch and he said, I'd love to make a music documentary with you. Here's what I do, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, I'd love to make a documentary, but I don't want to make another music film right now. I want to do something else. So we batted around a lot of different topics. He brought it up. He said, are you aware of the cleanup in Port Hope? I said, a little bit. And he said, well, does that interest you? I said, yeah, let's look at that. And the deeper we got into looking at the cleanup, then all of a sudden that brought us to the history of the discovery of uranium in Canada. And one thing led to another. And we went, well, we got to make this film. And we got lucky. It took us 2 years to get a broadcast license. We started working on this 3 or 4 years before the Oppenheimer film came out, by the way.
Takes a
So it's
long,
great
long time.
timing that film was so good. And it is. Anybody that hasn't seen it ought to go see it. Anyway, that's how I ended up doing this. I wanted a challenge. I was looking for I just was looking for something different to do. And it's a tremendously interesting topic. And it's
It
really
certainly is.
made a difference to me.
Bernie, final question to you. It's a question I ask every guest that comes on the show. This show is syndicated through the University Network, community networks right across Canada, around the world, YouTube channel, primarily to young people, college age students, university age students. What would you say to them today?
Well, I guess, find what you love and try to do it. That's what I think I would say. I mean, I consider myself extremely lucky. I spent my whole life doing things that I love. Not everything worked. Matter of fact, sort of like 51-49 in my favor. But that's what I think. I think that you've got to be very committed to what you do and do it as well as you can. I think that's the key for
I think
me.
that's perfect. That's a great
Yeah.
way to end it. Folks, if you're just joining us, we were speaking with Bernie Finkelstein. Bernie Finkelstein has served as chairman of the Ontario Film Development Corporation. He is a member of the Canadian Music Hall of Fame, of course, and the Order of Canada. We discussed a new documentary that Bernie is executive producer of called Atomic Reaction, which is about Canada's involvement in the Manhattan Project and the consequences thereof. I would urge you all to watch this documentary. It's coming out again on Durham Regional International Film Festival, October 24th, 27th of 2024. And it starts airing on CBC's documentary channel, October 27th, 2024, and CBC Gem, January 10th, 2025. So the new year. The main one I'm going to is the Regent Theatre in Picton, which is just a gorgeous, gorgeous old-fashioned theater. As a matter of fact, Houdini played there.
Wow.
Yeah, that's the true fact. Yep.
Didn't know that. I didn't know that.
Yep. And that's on November 24th. So
well, I'll be looking for you.
Oh, okay. As I said, just look for the Brad Pitt guy and the guy right next to him. Thanks very much for joining us, Bernie.
Thank
I'm
you.
Brent Holland from the Brent Holland Show. See you all next time.
A series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. Shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union.
Castro thought the Americans were about to attack, and he wanted Khrushchev to order those missiles fired and eliminate this scourge from the face of the earth. We'd all been lied to about it. Khrushchev had a back-channel means of corresponding with Kennedy. He lied about what he was doing in Cuba. War was likely to come, and some of those hawks were saying, "I told you so." That all of us sitting around that table could be sitting there in our last day on Earth.
The United States, as the world knows, will never start a war.